When I saw my husband flipping through my phone, my heart stopped, not because I feared the truth would come out, but because I was terrified he'd see those messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I reached out, trying to snatch the phone from his hands, but he skillfully jerked it away and continued reading. I watched his face change as he read each line, feeling my entire world crumble in those few seconds. Yes, he was about to find out the truth, but not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he turned the pages, and I knew this was it. He was going to reach that one message, the one that would destroy my life. The one that would either make everything clear, or perhaps make it more tangled. Then, suddenly, my phone buzzed in his hands, a new notification flashing across the screen. I watched his face drain of color as he read the sender's name. My husband froze. He didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I'm nervous. My nerves were tangled with the horrifying realization of what I had done. His breathing quickened. I could hear it, even from the 2 meters that separated us. This was the moment I feared most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. The kind of mistake that changed everything. And now, I didn't know what to do. But before I tell you what really happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a secret you tried so hard to hide, only for it to slip away from you? It was a normal Tuesday morning when everything started to shift. The house felt colder than usual, quieter. The kind of silence that settles in after years of routine, when the space between you and your partner becomes too wide to ignore. There was no argument last night, no specific incident that had triggered this shift. It was just the weight of everything that had been left unsaid, unacknowledged. I had always known that this day would come. Somewhere deep down, I had felt it, like an itch that couldn't be scratched. The distance in our marriage had been building for years, maybe longer than that. I wasn't unhappy, not in the way people imagine when they think of a broken marriage. But something had been missing. It wasn't obvious at first, just the slow erosion of connection. We lived in the same house, ate at the same table, slept in the same bed. Yet, in the last few months, I found myself longing for something more. Something alive. I would watch the way people looked at each other, the way their conversations seemed to have a spark, a pulse, and I would ache for it. Coffee? My husband's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, a mug in his hand, the steam rising from it. Thanks, I murmured, reaching for it. His eyes lingered on me, but not with any real curiosity. He had that look of someone who had long ago stopped asking how you were and was now simply going through the motions. There was nothing wrong with him. He wasn't cruel or distant in the traditional sense. But when was the last time he really saw me? Not as the woman he married, but as the person I was now. I sat down at the kitchen table, pushing my mug around in circles. He dropped his jacket over the back of a chair and sat down opposite me. A soft sigh left my lips, but it was lost in the quiet of the room. I didn't need to look up to feel the absence of any real connection between us. It wasn't his fault. He was a good man, dependable, hardworking. And I was grateful for that, I really was. But sometimes, I couldn't help but wonder if we had settled into this comfortable life at the expense of something more. I'm going to the garage, he said after a long pause, standing up and making his way to the back door. I nodded without looking at him. I heard the soft click of the door as he stepped outside, the sound echoing in the quiet of the house. It wasn't just the house that was quiet, though. It was me. I felt like a ghost walking through my own life, trapped in a routine that I didn't know how to escape. I used to feel alive when we first got together. There was passion, curiosity, excitement. But somewhere along the way, those feelings faded into something more predictable, more manageable. And that's when I started to notice the cracks. I pushed myself out of my chair and went to the window. Through the glass, I could see my husband working on the car. His hands were covered in grease as he twisted a wrench, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was something so familiar about it, something almost comforting. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the hollow feeling that it left in me. I hadn't realized how much I missed feeling seen until I met him. The mechanic. I'm not sure what it was about him that drew me in at first. Maybe it was the way he never tried to force a conversation, how he always seemed to understand when I was frustrated without me saying a word. Or perhaps it was the way he looked at me, like I wasn't invisible. He wasn't the kind of man I'd expected to find myself attracted to. But there he was, working on the car, his face covered in a mixture of oil and sweat, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel invisible. I felt alive. It wasn't an intentional thing. There was no moment where I made a conscious decision. It started with small moments, the way he would fix things around the house without being asked, the way he smiled at me when our paths crossed. We would talk about trivial things, his work, my life, and yet, in those moments, I felt like I was truly seen. I found myself looking forward to those brief exchanges, the quiet moments when we shared a smile or a word. I hadn't meant for it to happen. But slowly, over time, those small moments grew into something else. I wasn't sure what it was, not at first. I didn't even recognize it for what it was until one day, I caught myself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my hair before I went outside to check on the car. I was nervous. Nervous about seeing him. Nervous about feeling something. And that's when I knew. I had crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed. I tried to push the thought away. It was just a crush, a passing fancy, I told myself. I was a married woman, and this wasn't how things worked. But deep down, I couldn't deny it. I had noticed the way he looked at me, the way he touched my arm when he passed by. And I had felt it. That unspoken connection that made my heart race a little faster each time. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know if I even wanted to. And then one afternoon, when my husband was at work and I found myself alone in the house, the temptation was too great. I walked down the driveway, past the house, to the garage where he was working. "Need any help?" I asked, my voice coming out a little shakier than I intended. He glanced up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in a way that made my stomach flutter. "Just finishing up," he said. But I could always use company. I stepped closer, trying to ignore the way my heart was beating in my chest. We talked for a while, nothing significant, just idle chatter about the weather, the work he was doing, the neighbors. But there was something different about that conversation. It wasn't the words, but the way we exchanged them. The way our bodies seemed to lean toward each other, without either of us intending to. The tension was palpable, and I could feel the heat between us rising, almost unbearably. And that was when it happened. We kissed. It was brief, just a touch of lips, but it was enough to send a shockwave through me. I pulled away almost immediately, my breath catching in my throat, my heart pounding. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew that it would change everything. I stepped back, my breath still coming in shallow gasps. The heat from the kiss lingered, but it wasn't just the physical warmth. It was the rush of something I had been denying for so long. The guilt mixed with something else, a longing that I had buried deep inside for so many years. It was a feeling that was so foreign, yet so undeniably real. He stood there, watching me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken thoughts. I felt exposed, raw, like he could see everything I had hidden from myself and everyone else. But then, he said something that shattered the moment, pulling me back to reality. "You should go inside," he said, his voice low and calm, but his eyes betraying a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I nodded, my hands trembling as I turned toward the door. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I wasn't sure if I was running away from him or from myself. Either way, I needed space to breathe, to think. As I stepped into the house, I closed the door behind me, pressing my back against it. The quiet of the house felt deafening now. The world outside seemed so distant, as if I had crossed some invisible boundary and couldn't go back. My pulse was still racing, but now it wasn't from the kiss, it was from the realization of what I had just done. I walked slowly to the kitchen, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring at the counter, my hands gripping the edge, trying to keep myself grounded. But it wasn't working. I could still feel the weight of his lips on mine, the way his hands had held me, the way his body had pressed so close to mine. I had always told myself that I would never let something like this happen. I had made promises to myself, to my husband, to my family. But somewhere along the way, those promises had started to feel like empty words. And now, I was standing here, with the consequences of my actions swirling around me, and I didn't know how to fix it. The sound of the front door opening startled me. My husband had come home. "Everything okay?" he called from the hallway, his voice carrying through the house. I froze for a moment, the words caught in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to face him, not like this. Not after what I had just done. "Yeah," I finally managed to say, my voice thin and weak. "Just tired." There was a pause, and then I heard him walk toward the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, my hands shaking as I tried to calm myself. I could hear him moving around the house, but it all felt so distant, so far removed from the chaos inside my own head. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected any of it. But it had happened. And now I had to figure out what to do with it. I couldn't let him know. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. I didn't even know what the truth was anymore. Was it the kiss? Or was it the emptiness I had been feeling for so long, the need for something more that had led me here? I didn't have answers, and the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. What had happened between me and him? Was it just a fleeting mistake? Or was it something deeper, something that I couldn't deny, no matter how hard I tried? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't go back. I couldn't erase what had happened, no matter how much I wished I could. The memory of his touch, his kiss, lingered on my lips, and I hated it. I hated how much it consumed me, how much I wanted to forget and yet couldn't. But then I thought about him, my husband. He was here, right now, in this house, living his life. He had no idea what was happening, what I was feeling. He was still the man I had married, the man who had stood by me through thick and thin. But that man, the one I had once known so intimately, was now a stranger to me. I had changed, and I didn't know if I could ever go back to who I was before. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. But who could I talk to? Who could understand the mess I had gotten myself into? I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to destroy everything we had built together. But I was already doing it. And that realization was more painful than anything I had ever experienced. I leaned back against the counter, closing my eyes, trying to make sense of the whirlwind inside me. I knew I had to do something. But what? The sound of footsteps approaching the kitchen made me open my eyes. My husband was standing in the doorway, his eyes searching mine, as if looking for something, anything. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, waiting for me to speak. But I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I've just been distracted lately." He frowned, a hint of concern in his eyes. "Is everything okay? You seem distant." I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to confess everything that had been weighing on my heart for so long. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain to him that I had kissed someone else? How could I tell him that I had been slowly falling apart for years, and that this moment, this one kiss, was the result of 1,000 tiny cracks that had finally shattered? I didn't know. And so I stayed silent. "I'm fine," I repeated, forcing a smile that felt more like a mask than anything real. "Just tired." He nodded slowly, still watching me, but he didn't press me further. Instead, he walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. He didn't even notice the tension in the air, the way my entire body was screaming for him to see that something was wrong. He never saw. Not the way he should have. I felt a strange sense of relief when he finally turned and walked away. But at the same time, I felt a deep sense of loss, as though something irreparable had been broken between us, and there was no way to fix it. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But I also knew that I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my actions. Not yet. And so, I stayed there, in that kitchen, alone with my thoughts, trying to figure out how to put the pieces of my life back together. The days passed in a blur, a haze of routine and uncertainty. My husband and I moved around each other like strangers, polite but distant, never quite meeting eye to eye. The silence between us grew thicker, suffocating the house in a way that felt almost unbearable. I spent my days in a fog, too afraid to confront what had happened, yet unable to escape it. Each time I saw him, my guilt intensified, gnawing at me from the inside out. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. I went about my chores, taking care of everything with mechanical precision, but every action seemed hollow. I washed dishes, folded laundry, cleaned the kitchen, tasks that had once been familiar and almost comforting. But now, they were just distractions, things to do so I wouldn't have to think about the mess I had created. There were moments when I thought about confessing, telling him everything. But what would that accomplish? Would it make things better? Could it undo the damage that had already been done? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the truth was a double-edged sword. Telling him would shatter him, yes, but it would also shatter me. I didn't know if I could survive that kind of honesty, if I could bear the weight of his disappointment, his pain. I thought about the mechanic, about the way he made me feel. He was a reminder of everything I had been missing in my marriage, the excitement, the connection, the warmth. He had shown me what I had been longing for, what I had been too afraid to ask for. But the kiss had been a mistake. I knew that now. It was a fleeting moment of weakness, something I could never take back. It was the kind of thing that should never have happened, and yet it had. And now, it was hanging over me like a dark cloud, blocking out everything else. I could feel the tension building inside me, a pressure that had nowhere to go. I needed an outlet, something to release the fear and guilt that were choking me. But instead of talking about it, confronting it, I kept pushing it down, burying it deeper inside. It was easier that way, easier to pretend everything was fine, to smile when I didn't feel like smiling, to act like I wasn't slowly falling apart. One evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen again, staring at the counter. The light from the window cast long shadows across the room, and the silence was deafening. My husband was in the living room, watching TV, his attention focused on the screen. I could hear the sound of the show he was watching, but it felt distant, like it was happening in another world. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the noise in my head, the endless questions that plagued me. Should I tell him? Should I confess? Or should I just keep pretending like nothing had changed? I didn't know what to do, and the uncertainty was tearing me apart. It was then that I heard the knock at the door. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. It was late, almost 9 o'clock. Who could it be? I walked slowly to the door, my pulse quickening with each step. When I opened it, I was greeted by the familiar face of the mechanic. He was standing on the doorstep, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. His eyes were shadowed, and there was a tension in his posture, as though he was trying to hold himself together. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was a conversation I was ready to have. But I nodded and stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The moment he crossed the threshold, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anxiety, guilt. It was like seeing an old friend, but one with whom I shared a secret that was too heavy to bear. He glanced around the house, his eyes briefly flicking to the living room where my husband was still watching TV. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, his tone awkward. "But we need to talk." I nodded, unable to speak. We moved to the kitchen, the space between us filled with unspoken words. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to speak. I had been avoiding this moment for days, and now that it was here, I was terrified. He sat down at the table, his eyes meeting mine. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said quietly. "About the kiss." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake. A stupid mistake." He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, looking at me with a strange, unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "But I think you need to tell him." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. I can't tell him. It would destroy everything." "I know," he said softly, his gaze dropping to his hands. "But you're not going to be able to keep this up forever. It's eating you alive, isn't it?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He was right. Every day that I kept this secret, it felt like a little more of me was slipping away. "I don't know what to do," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I want to fix it." The mechanic didn't answer right away. He seemed to be thinking carefully, his brow furrowed. Then, he looked at me, his expression softening. "I know this is hard," he said quietly. "But you're not going to be able to move forward until you make a choice. You can't keep living like this. Not forever." I felt a lump form in my throat, and I had to fight to keep my composure. "I don't want to hurt him," I whispered. "But I don't know how to go back." The mechanic leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "You don't have to go back. You just have to figure out what you want now. And then you have to be honest with him. It's the only way." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave, to get out and never come back. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, numb, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. The lies, the avoidance, the pretending, it wasn't sustainable. But the truth? The truth felt like a death sentence. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I'm scared of what will happen if I tell him. I'm scared of what I'll lose." The mechanic didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I felt like he understood. He understood the fear, the guilt, the pain of being caught between two worlds, one that was slipping away and one that I wasn't sure I could hold on to. "I know," he said quietly. "But you'll never know what you're truly capable of until you face it." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. The choice, the decision, was mine. And now, I had to figure out if I was strong enough to make it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside my husband, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. He slept soundly, unaware that the woman lying inches from him was unraveling. My thoughts wouldn't stop circling around the kiss, the guilt, the conversation in the kitchen, the look in the mechanic's eyes. His words had echoed through my mind like an alarm I couldn't shut off. You're not going to be able to keep this up forever. He was right, of course. But knowing that didn't make the next step any clearer. I turned toward the window and watched as the first hints of dawn crept into the sky. The house was silent, still cloaked in the softness of early morning. There was something sacred about that hour, before alarms, before noise, before people. I often found myself drawn to it in recent years. It was the only time I could hear myself think. That morning, I made coffee slowly, deliberately. The familiar motions calmed me, measuring the grounds, filling the reservoir, pressing the button. I didn't rush. I didn't want to wake him. I just needed a moment to breathe. With a warm mug in my hand, I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of grass and something metallic from the nearby garages. I wrapped my arms around myself and sat on the old wooden bench, letting the coolness bite at my skin. It grounded me. Made me feel awake. I thought about what I wanted. It was a simple question, but I didn't have a simple answer. Did I want to stay? Did I want to leave? Did I want to tell the truth? Or did I just want it all to go back to the way it was before the kiss? But even that wasn't the beginning. The truth was, things hadn't been okay for a long time. I had just learned how to mask it, how to function. I had become good at pretending, so good that sometimes I believed it myself. But not anymore. The mask had slipped, and now I couldn't put it back on. By the time my husband woke up and joined me in the kitchen, I was dressed and preparing breakfast. He kissed the top of my head and said good morning. I mumbled something in return and poured him a cup of coffee. He didn't seem to notice anything different about me. That used to bother me. Now, I wasn't sure how I felt. Indifference? Sadness? Maybe both. The day passed uneventfully. I ran errands, picked up groceries, stopped by the pharmacy for vitamins I didn't really need. I needed the distraction. I kept moving, hoping that motion would somehow keep the thoughts at bay. But they followed me everywhere. In the car, in the aisles of the store, while folding laundry. The ache in my chest didn't ease. Late in the afternoon, I passed by the garage on my way home. I slowed down, almost stopping, but then thought better of it. I didn't know what I would even say to him. Thank you? I'm sorry. I knew it would only complicate things further. So I kept driving. At home, I found the mail on the counter. Nothing important, bills, a catalog, a flyer for a lawn care service. But tucked in the pile was a small white envelope with no return address. My name was written on the front in blocky, uneven letters. My stomach dropped. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a printed screenshot. A single image. Grainy but unmistakable. It was of the garage. And me. With him. Our faces weren't clear, but our posture, our proximity, there was no mistaking what it was. We weren't touching in the image, but the implication was loud and clear. My hands trembled as I held the paper. There was no note, no threat, no explanation. Just the image. A silent accusation. I felt sick. Who had sent this? Who had taken it? How long had someone known? Was it a neighbor? Someone with a security camera angled just right? My mind spiraled through possibilities, none of them comforting. I folded the paper and shoved it into the bottom of a drawer, as if hiding it would erase its existence. But I could still feel it, burning like a brand on my skin. I didn't know who else had seen it, or if more copies existed. That uncertainty terrified me more than anything. Dinner that night was unbearable. Every word my husband said felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. I nodded at the right moments, forced small smiles, pretended to be present. But I couldn't focus. I kept looking at his face, wondering what he would do if he knew. Would he recognize the woman in that photo? Would he be angry? Hurt? Would he walk out? Would he forgive me? The truth was, I didn't deserve forgiveness. I had betrayed him, not just with a kiss, but with my silence, my deception. Every moment I pretended, I added another layer to the lie. That night, as we got ready for bed, he asked if I was feeling okay. I told him I had a headache. He offered to get me something, but I declined. I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want to feel his kindness. It made the guilt worse. In the dark, I lay awake again, replaying the image in my mind. The angle, the distance, it had been taken without my knowledge. That fact alone should have made me angry, but it didn't. I wasn't thinking about privacy or invasion. I was thinking about consequences. If that image found its way to him, to his phone, to his eyes, everything would be over. There would be no coming back. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confess. Not yet. The next morning, I checked the drawer. The envelope was still there. I unfolded the image again, staring at it in the early light. I wasn't just afraid of being caught. I was afraid of what it said about me. That I had let it happen. That I had wanted it to happen. That some part of me still did. I thought about driving to the garage again, about confronting him, asking if he had sent it. But I knew he hadn't. He wouldn't have done that. He was as shaken as I was, maybe more. That photo had come from someone else, someone who had seen too much. By mid-morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and left the house, not even sure where I was going. I drove aimlessly for a while, through neighborhoods and back roads, letting the motion soothe me. Finally, I pulled into a small parking lot near a park and sat in the car, staring out at the trees. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried through any of this. But now, sitting alone with nothing but the hum of the engine and the wind in the trees, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The photo, the silence, the distance in my marriage, the confusion about what I wanted, all of it sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't ready to confess. I wasn't ready to make a decision. But I knew the time was running out. And somewhere out there, someone knew my secret. We kissed. That was it. Not passionate, not lingering. Just a moment, and then it was over. I pulled away first, almost instinctively, my breath catching in my throat, unsure if it had even happened. But it had. We both knew it. There was no denying the shift that took place between us in that brief, fragile second. I didn't speak. I turned and walked back toward the house, not looking back to see if he was still watching me. I already knew he was. The air felt heavier that evening, as if the atmosphere itself had thickened in response to what had happened. Even inside the house, I felt it pressing against my skin, an invisible weight of knowing. My husband was upstairs, I could hear the sound of the shower running. I stood in the hallway, unmoving, listening to the rhythmic splash of water. I wondered if he could sense it, somehow, in the steam, in the walls. Could he feel that something fundamental between us had changed? I wandered into the kitchen, restless, my fingers trailing along the countertop. The kiss had been quiet, but it was loud in my memory. It echoed in everything I touched. I wanted to scrub it off me, to undo it, but I also knew that wasn't the truth. Because part of me, deep down, a place I hated admitting existed, had wanted it. And not just that kiss, but something else. Something more dangerous. A feeling. An escape. That night, I lay awake in bed, my husband beside me, his back turned as usual. I could hear his breathing, slow and steady. I stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to close my eyes. My thoughts spun like clothes in a dryer, tumbling, repetitive, chaotic. I had kissed someone else. And even if it had been small, brief, it wasn't meaningless. Not to me. It meant something, and that terrified me. The next morning, everything was the same. He made coffee. I folded laundry. We talked about groceries and weekend plans like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and pretending otherwise felt like lying in every breath I took. I kept glancing out the window toward the garage. The mechanic's truck was gone. I didn't know if that brought relief or disappointment. I told myself it was better this way. Space was good. Distance was necessary. But I still found myself scanning the road, listening for the familiar rumble of his engine. When I didn't hear it, I felt the ache again. That dull, gnawing emptiness. The mail came around noon. I waited for the carrier to leave before stepping outside, as if avoiding the slightest possibility of human interaction. I pulled the small stack from the box, an electric bill, a flyer, a thin envelope without a return address. My stomach turned. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I tucked it between the others and carried the pile inside with shaky hands. Once behind the safety of the closed kitchen door, I slid the envelope open. This time, there was no photo. Just a single sheet of paper. A printed message in bold black text. I saw you. You're not as invisible as you think. There was no name, no signature, no indication of where it had come from. But the message sent a chill through me, sharper than the photo had. Someone had watched. Someone was still watching. It wasn't just a glimpse. It was deliberate. My throat tightened. I read the words again and again, trying to make sense of them, searching for a clue, something that would tell me who had sent it. But there was nothing. Just a sentence, a threat disguised as a statement of fact. I shredded the note and flushed the pieces down the toilet. I didn't want it in the trash. I didn't want it to exist anywhere. But I couldn't erase the feeling it left inside me. My hands shook for the rest of the day. Every time the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed, my heart jumped. I felt hunted by a truth that hadn't even fully unraveled. At dinner, my husband talked about the neighbor's new landscaping. I nodded along, said something about the weather. But my eyes kept drifting to the window, to the edge of the yard, to the shadows between the trees. Every flicker of movement made my skin prickle. When night came, I closed every curtain in the house. I checked each lock twice. My husband noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked, brow furrowed. I forced a smile, told him I had read something disturbing online, just wanted to be safe. He accepted the explanation with a nod, and we carried on. But inside, I was unraveling. The next morning, I decided to drive. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to move, to breathe somewhere else. I left the house under the guise of running errands, but I didn't stop at the store. I drove past the town limits, out toward the quiet roads that wound between empty fields and forgotten barns. I ended up at a laundromat on the edge of town, one I hadn't been to in years. It was nearly empty, save for a woman folding towels near the back. I sat on the hard plastic bench and stared at the spinning drum of a dryer. I wasn't there to do laundry. I just needed a place to sit where no one expected anything from me. I thought about what I'd done. About how easily it had happened. Not because I was careless, but because I was desperate. Not for passion, not for drama, but for acknowledgement. For someone to see me, to recognize that I still existed beneath the surface of routine. The mechanic had seen me, even if just briefly. And now I was paying for it. The woman at the back of the laundromat caught my eye. She gave me a small nod, then returned to her towels. I envied her. I imagined her life was simple, orderly, untouched by betrayal or secrets. I knew it probably wasn't. But I still wanted to trade places with her, if only for a moment. After a while, I left the laundromat and drove back home. The road stretched ahead of me like a path I wasn't sure I wanted to keep following. I kept thinking of the note. Of the photo. Of what might come next. Whoever had sent them hadn't asked for anything, no demands, no threats. Just the knowledge that I had been seen. And that was somehow worse. The silence of it. The waiting. Back home, I sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. The house looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. I unlocked the door, stepped into the kitchen, and leaned against the counter. Everything felt heavier now. My husband came in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. He smiled when he saw me. "I was thinking we could take a drive this weekend," he said. "Go somewhere quiet." I nodded. Said it sounded nice. But in my chest, the panic surged. I had kissed another man. Someone new. And now, I didn't know what would fall apart first, my marriage, my peace, or my own sense of who I was. The following days passed like the slow drip of a leaky faucet, constant, dull, impossible to ignore. I moved through them as if under water, my limbs heavy, my thoughts slow. The image and the note haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, someone who knew too much and chose to say so little. It was the silence of it that disturbed me most. Whoever it was hadn't come forward, hadn't demanded anything. They had simply observed, and with that observation, they'd taken something from me, my control, my illusion of privacy, the delicate balance I had been struggling to maintain. My husband seemed unaware. He was back to his usual routines, working on his car, reading in the evenings, occasionally humming to himself while watering the plants on the porch. His world remained intact, untouched by the undercurrent that was tearing through mine. I envied him for that, for his peaceful ignorance, even as I knew it couldn't last. Every time he looked at me, I wondered if he saw it, the change, the heaviness behind my eyes, the way I flinched at unexpected sounds or took too long to answer simple questions. I found myself overcompensating, smiling more, asking about his day, sitting with him during the evening news. I laughed at stories I didn't hear, nodded at points I didn't process. It was all performance, a carefully curated mask to cover the unraveling underneath. But masks have a way of cracking. One afternoon, while he was out on a grocery run, I decided to clean the house. Not because it needed it, but because I needed to do something with my hands. I scrubbed the bathroom tiles with unnecessary force, rearranged drawers that were already organized, wiped windows that didn't need wiping. Physical exertion dulled the noise in my head, if only for a little while. When I reached the garage entrance, I hesitated. I hadn't gone in there since the kiss. I told myself it was just a space, a room like any other, but I knew better. It wasn't the walls or the tools that made me pause. It was the memory, etched into the air like a lingering scent. I opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The garage was exactly as I remembered. The smell of oil and metal hung heavy in the air. His fingerprints still stained the workbench, a rag tossed casually over the edge. My eyes scanned the room, landing on the spot where we had stood, where everything had shifted. The image from the photo flashed through my mind, and my stomach clenched. That's where someone had seen us. From somewhere. Somehow. I walked slowly toward the bench, tracing my fingers along its edge. A part of me had hoped it would feel different after all this time, less charged. But it didn't. It felt alive, as if the memory itself had seeped into the concrete. I stood there for several minutes, listening to the soft hum of nothing, trying to decide if I regretted what had happened or just regretted being caught. The doorbell rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. I jumped, my pulse quickening. For a brief, irrational moment, I thought it might be another envelope, another note, another confirmation that I was being watched. I hurried to the front door, wiping my hands on my pants, trying to compose myself. But it was only the mailman, dropping off a package. I thanked him with a tight smile and watched him walk away. Then I looked down at the package. It was addressed to me, but I hadn't ordered anything. My name, neat and centered, no return address. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. My hands hovered over it, uncertain. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I would. I grabbed a knife and sliced through the tape. Inside was a small box and, beneath it, another envelope. I opened the envelope first. It contained a single sentence. Sometimes silence is louder than words. My breath caught. My hands trembled. I set the note down and opened the box. Inside was a flash drive. I didn't move for a long time. The house was silent, the clock ticking softly from the living room. I stared at the drive, knowing that whatever was on it would change everything. But I couldn't bring myself to plug it in. Not yet. Not without knowing what I would find. Not without knowing if I was ready to see. Eventually, I slid the drive back into the box, sealed it, and hid it beneath the sink, behind a stack of unused cleaning products. I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't even tell myself what I planned to do with it. That night, I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at my husband as he slept. His face was relaxed, his features softened in rest. I tried to remember the last time we had touched without obligation, the last time he had reached for my hand without prompting. I tried to remember the last time I had wanted him to. I knew he loved me in his way. He had built this life with me, brick by brick, year by year. He had provided, supported, stayed. But love, I had learned, wasn't always enough. Not when it stopped evolving, stopped listening. Somewhere along the way, I had become background noise in my own life. I crawled into bed beside him, careful not to wake him. I lay there, eyes open, listening to the darkness. The next morning, I didn't check the hiding place. I went about my routine as usual, coffee, breakfast, small talk. But I felt it like a stone in my pocket, that box, that flash drive, the note. I carried them with me in every interaction, every smile, every moment of silence. Later that day, while he was working in the backyard, I stepped outside and stood at the edge of the porch, watching him from a distance. He was digging around the base of a bush, focused, content. I used to find comfort in his constancy. Now, it only reminded me of how much I had changed. He looked up and smiled at me, waving his dirt-covered hand. I waved back, and in that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. He didn't know what I had done. He didn't know what I was hiding. And I didn't know how much longer I could protect him from the truth. That night, as I stood brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I felt so disconnected from the woman I used to be. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, only that I couldn't go back. And still, the silence stretched on. Not just from me, but from whoever was watching. From whoever had sent the box. The lack of follow-up, of demands or threats, left me with a gnawing sense of dread. It was the waiting that was unbearable. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew that whatever it was, I wouldn't be ready. The days blurred together, each one indistinguishable from the next. I found myself trapped in a loop, waking up, pretending everything was fine, working through the motions, and going to bed. I wasn't sure what I was trying to hold on to anymore. The mask I had worn for so long was beginning to crack, and I felt more and more like a stranger in my own life. The house, the routines, the things I once found comfort in, they all felt like remnants of a past I couldn't reclaim. But the silence was the worst part. It wasn't just the silence of my own home, where I existed with my husband but not with him. It wasn't just the unspoken tension that hung in the air between us. It was the silence of the person who had sent the photo, the note, the flash drive. Whoever was watching, they never came forward. They never spoke. And that was the thing that gnawed at me the most. The uncertainty. The feeling that I was always being watched, that the truth would be pulled out of me at any moment. It felt like the calm before a storm that never arrived, and yet I couldn't shake the sense that it was coming. My husband was still oblivious, his world going on as it always had. He went to work, fixed things around the house, and occasionally asked me how my day was. Each time, I gave him the same answer, fine. Everything's fine. The repetition of it made my heart ache. He deserved more. I deserved more. But I didn't know how to give him either. I woke up one morning to a ringing phone. It was early, too early, but it felt like a jolt to my system, like the universe was finally breaking the silence. I stared at the screen for a moment, confused by the unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. Hello? Is this her? The voice on the other end was shaky, breathless, as if the person wasn't sure whether to speak or hang up. I blinked, my heart pounding in my chest. Who is this? I asked, my voice cracking slightly. It's me, the voice said. I saw it. The picture. The photo. My stomach dropped. I didn't have to ask which photo. There was only one. I felt a cold rush of panic flood my body. What do you want? I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. I don't know what to do with this, the voice continued, sounding more lost than accusatory. I don't know who to tell. I don't want to ruin everything, but it's not right. It's not right what's happening. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. I don't know who you are, or what you think you know. But you need to stop. This isn't your business. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I thought you should know, I thought you should know someone's watching. You're not as invisible as you think. The line went silent for a moment before the person added, I don't want to be involved. I'm just letting you know. I won't tell anyone, but I had to tell you. The click of the phone as they hung up felt like an explosion in my chest. I stood there for a long time, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. My mind raced. Someone had seen. And they had reached out, but not to expose me. To warn me. But who? I felt my pulse quicken, my breath shallow. The voice had sounded familiar in some way, but I couldn't place it. They had known too much. And now, they were waiting. Waiting for me to react. Waiting for me to fall apart. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't go to my husband, not with this. Not with what I had done. He couldn't know. I couldn't bear to watch him lose faith in me, to see the hurt in his eyes. The thought of losing everything I had worked for, everything we had built, was unbearable. But I couldn't go on pretending either. The weight of the secret was suffocating me. And now, the person who had been silently watching me knew the truth. Or at least, part of it. I needed answers. I needed to confront this. But how? Who could I turn to? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. My husband was home. I hadn't even realized how long I had been standing there, holding the phone. I quickly shoved it into my pocket and forced a smile, smoothing my hair as he walked into the room. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft, but his eyes searching mine, as if looking for something. I nodded, trying to push the panic out of my system. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind," I said, my voice tight. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine in what was meant to be a comforting gesture. But I couldn't help flinching slightly, the weight of the secret between us making it hard to relax. I felt like a stranger in my own body, as if I were wearing someone else's skin. "I know it's been tough lately," he said, looking at me with concern. "But you're not alone in this, you know? Whatever it is, we'll get through it together." I felt my throat close up. His words, so simple, so loving, made the guilt feel even sharper. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to scream the truth and beg for forgiveness. But I couldn't. Not yet. "I know," I whispered, forcing myself to look at him. "I know." He smiled at me, as if everything was fine, and I smiled back, not because I felt anything, but because it was what I was supposed to do. He kissed me gently on the cheek before walking off to change out of his work clothes. As I stood there in the kitchen, the silence enveloping me again, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living this way. Something had to give. The truth was already out there, and no amount of pretending could make it go away. But how could I face it? How could I face him? I walked to the window, watching as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. The world outside seemed so ordinary, so unaffected. But inside, I felt like a house on fire, burning from the inside out, and no one could see the flames. I was running out of time. The question was, when it all came crashing down, would I be able to survive the fallout? Or would I destroy everything in the process? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't keep hiding. Not anymore. The days felt like they were moving in slow motion, each one dragging into the next with no sense of progress, no end in sight. The house was quieter now, quieter than it had been in months, maybe even years. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the faint rustle of leaves outside in the breeze, and yet all I could focus on was the tight knot in my chest, the one that had been there since the day I kissed him, since the moment I knew that everything was about to unravel. I couldn't look at my husband the same way anymore. It wasn't his fault, but I couldn't stop seeing the truth of what I had done. Every time he smiled at me, I felt like a liar. Every time he touched me, I felt his warmth against the coldness inside me. And yet, every time I pulled away, I hated myself a little more. I had started to avoid him, not on purpose, but because I couldn't look at him without feeling like I was suffocating. I knew I was drifting away from him, but I didn't know how to stop it. How do you go back to someone who has been with you through everything when you can't remember what it felt like to be with them? It wasn't just about the kiss anymore. It was about everything else that came with it, the guilt, the uncertainty, the fear of being found out. It was the secret I had been carrying, the one that was eating away at me, piece by piece. The longer I held it in, the worse it felt, but I couldn't tell him. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wasn't ready for the consequences, not yet. I spent the next few days trapped in my own thoughts, moving through the house like a ghost. My husband was still so unaware, still so comfortable in his oblivion. He went about his routines, occasionally asking if I was okay, but I could never bring myself to tell him what was really going on. How could I? How could I look him in the eye and say the words that would shatter everything we had? It wasn't just the guilt of the kiss, it was everything that came before it. The years of silence, of drifting apart, of pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I had buried that feeling for so long, buried the loneliness, the need for something more, but it had never really gone away. And now, I was paying the price for it. The worst part was the silence of the person who had sent the photo, the note. The flash drive. Whoever they were watching me, waiting for me to slip. And I was slipping. The walls I had built around myself were crumbling, piece by piece. The weight of it all was unbearable. I hadn't heard from them again, not since the phone call. But I knew they were out there, still watching. It was a constant reminder that I wasn't in control anymore. My life wasn't my own. It had been taken from me in an instant, and now, I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, one evening, as I was sitting in the living room, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. My husband was still at work, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face anyone, let alone confront whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. I hesitated, staring at the door, my pulse quickening. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me urged me to. Maybe it was the fear, maybe it was the desperation for something to change, but I got up and walked to the door. I opened it slowly, not knowing what to expect. When I saw who was standing there, I froze. It was the mechanic. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of everything between us. I had never expected to see him again, not like this. Not after everything that had happened. But there he was, standing on my doorstep, looking at me with that same unreadable expression. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't immediately answer. He just looked at me, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, he spoke, his voice low. "We need to talk." I wasn't sure what to say. I hadn't planned on this. I hadn't planned on facing him, not like this, not after everything that had happened. But I knew, deep down, that I had no choice. I stepped aside, silently inviting him in. He walked in without saying another word, and I closed the door behind him. We stood in the living room, the silence between us thick and uncomfortable. I couldn't read him, couldn't understand what was going through his mind. The last time we had spoken, he had been distant, as if he was already preparing to walk away. He looked at me, his eyes soft but serious. "I think you know why I'm here," he said. I swallowed hard. "I didn't want this," I said quietly. "I didn't want any of this." "I know," he replied. "But we're both in this now. There's no going back." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had known this was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made it all feel too real. We were both in this. And I had no idea how to get out. "Why did you come back?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" He hesitated, looking away for a moment before turning back to me. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came because I think you need to hear something. You're not the only one who's been keeping secrets." The weight of his words sank into me, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What did he mean by that? Had he been hiding something too? "Secrets?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm not the only one who's been keeping things from the people they love. You're not the only one hiding." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, the fear in my chest growing with every word he said. He sighed, as if struggling with something inside. "I can't be the one to tell you everything. That's something you have to figure out for yourself. But I'm telling you now, you're not the only one with secrets." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. The words swirled in my mind, but I couldn't make sense of them. What was he trying to say? Why was he here? Before I could ask, he turned and walked toward the door. "I can't be part of this anymore," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But you need to know that you're not alone. You're not the only one who's been living a lie." And with that, he was gone. The door closed behind him, and I was left standing there, numb, unable to move. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me to fall. I didn't know what to do next, where to go, or who to trust. The world around me felt like it was closing in, and I had no way out. But one thing was clear, the truth was coming for me, and I had no idea how to face it. The house was eerily quiet after he left. I stood there for a long while, staring at the door, feeling the weight of his words like a heavy stone sinking into my chest. "You're not the only one with secrets." The phrase kept echoing in my mind, as though it was carved into the walls, too loud to ignore, too sharp to forget. What did he mean? Was it a warning? Or something else? The idea that he might have been hiding something, anything, made the already complex situation even harder to process. I was already drowning in my own guilt, in my own lies. But now, the possibility that someone else had been living a lie too, someone who had witnessed my mistake and carried their own burden, it made me feel even more lost, even more detached. I sank into the couch, the room closing in around me, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel the full force of everything that had happened. The kiss, the secrecy, the photograph, the phone call, the weight of all of it was crushing. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about the flash drive. I hadn't opened it yet, but I knew, deep down, that I couldn't keep avoiding it. I had to know what was on it. I glanced at the drawer where I had hidden it, the small box now a looming presence in the back of my mind. I stood up and walked over to it, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled it out. I stared at the drive for a long time, my fingers hovering over it, unsure if I was truly ready to face whatever it contained. But I had come this far, hadn't I? There was no going back now. With a deep breath, I plugged it into my laptop. The screen blinked, then opened a folder. Inside was a single video file. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't even know what I was expecting, but the sudden clarity of it, the file, the name, everything, sent a chill through me. I clicked on it. The video opened, and for a moment, I was unable to breathe. It was footage from the garage. The same one from the photo. There was no sound, just the raw visual of me standing there, looking uncertain, my back against the workbench. The mechanic was visible in the frame too, standing just a few steps away from me, his face half hidden in shadow. There was something painfully intimate about the way the video captured us, our proximity, the tension in the air that was thick enough to cut through. I watched the scene unfold on the screen, unable to look away, my pulse racing. Then, the camera angle shifted slightly, and I saw myself, my reflection, clearer now, standing closer to him. I could feel the tension of the moment all over again. The kiss. The moment that started all of this. It was there, recorded, preserved in time. My stomach turned. Whoever had filmed this knew exactly what they were doing. They had been there, watching. There was no mistaking it. And now they had it, this damning piece of evidence, the one that could unravel everything. I stopped the video. I couldn't watch anymore. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight, like I was suffocating. The weight of it was unbearable. The consequences of my actions were real now, documented, unchangeable. I stared at the screen, the video paused in time, and I wondered what would happen next. Who else had seen this? Had it been shared? Was this just the beginning? A part of me wanted to erase the evidence, to destroy it, to make it all disappear. But I knew I couldn't. It was too late for that. The truth was already out there. And sooner or later, someone would make sure it reached the person who needed to see it most. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. My husband was home. I quickly unplugged the drive and shoved it into the drawer. I couldn't bear for him to see it, to know what I had just watched. I stood up, trying to compose myself, smoothing down my clothes and taking a deep breath. He walked into the living room, smiling as he saw me standing there. "Hey, how was your day?" he asked, his voice light, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I forced a smile, hoping it looked real. "Same as always," I replied. "Just keeping busy." He smiled and walked over to the couch, sitting beside me. His presence, so familiar, was comforting in a way, but also terrifying. I couldn't stop thinking about the video, about the secret I was carrying, about the truth that was slowly suffocating me. "I was thinking," he said, as he leaned back, "maybe we could take a day trip this weekend. Get away for a bit." I nodded, trying to seem enthusiastic. "That sounds great," I said, though the idea of being alone with him, away from everything, felt more like a trap than a relief. The silence stretched between us, the kind that used to be comforting but now felt suffocating. I couldn't relax, couldn't let myself go back to the way things were. It wasn't just the kiss. It wasn't just the lies. It was everything that had led up to this moment, the disconnection, the things left unsaid, the years of unspoken frustration that had festered under the surface. He glanced over at me, his expression softening. "You've been distant lately," he said quietly. "Are you sure everything's okay?" I looked at him, unsure of what to say. How could I explain the weight of what I was carrying? How could I tell him that I had kissed someone else, that I had been living a lie? How could I tell him that I was suffocating under the weight of my own actions, that I had no idea how to fix this? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. I felt the lump in my throat tighten, the tears threatening to spill over. How had it all come to this? "I'm fine," I finally whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just tired." He reached over, placing his hand on mine. "You don't have to pretend," he said, his voice gentle. "You can talk to me." I felt the warmth of his hand against mine, the comfort of his presence, but it only made the guilt heavier. I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't tell him what I had done, what I was hiding. The truth was too big, too overwhelming. Instead, I stayed silent, squeezing his hand tightly, and pretending everything was fine. But inside, I knew it wasn't. It was never going to be fine again. As the evening wore on, I retreated into myself, burying the truth deeper inside, hoping that somehow it would disappear. But I knew it wouldn't. It was already out there, already in motion. And no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, to forget, the reality of what I had done was waiting for me, ready to destroy everything. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I deserved to be saved. The days continued to blur together, each one indistinguishable from the last. I woke up every morning with a knot in my stomach, a heaviness that never seemed to lift. My husband went about his day as if everything were fine, his actions unchanged, his words unaffected. But every time I looked at him, I saw the lies, and every time he touched me, I felt the weight of the truth I was carrying. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending. I had tried to push everything away, to ignore the mounting tension, but it wasn't working. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with my bare hands. The pressure was too great, and sooner or later, something would break. One morning, as I sat in the kitchen, the silence between us more palpable than ever, I found myself staring at the pile of unopened mail on the counter. Among the usual bills and catalogs, there was an envelope that stood out. It was thin, almost too thin, and there was no return address. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, instinctively knowing that it was another piece of the puzzle I didn't want to solve. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed note. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words. "I know what you've done. You're not alone in this." My pulse quickened, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The handwriting was typed, neat and clinical, and yet the message it carried was enough to paralyze me. I had hoped, prayed, that the worst was over, that somehow the secret would remain buried, but now, it felt like everything was starting to unravel. Someone else knew. They knew about the kiss, the betrayal, everything. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see my husband standing in the doorway, watching me. But there was nothing. The house was as quiet as it had always been, and yet everything felt different. It felt as though the walls were closing in on me, as though I was trapped in a web of my own making, and there was no way out. I crumpled the note in my hand, the anger rising in my chest. How could they have known? Who else had been watching? The thought that someone was observing my every move, waiting for the moment when the truth would come to light, filled me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I shoved the note into the drawer with the flash drive and locked it away again. The thought of confronting my husband about any of this seemed impossible. What could I say? What could I do? I had already made too many mistakes, and the consequences were slowly catching up with me. The days that followed felt like a constant state of tension. I went through the motions of daily life, but it was like I was moving through a fog. Every conversation with my husband felt like a performance, every smile a lie. I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the facade. The truth was eating at me, gnawing away at the edges of everything I had built. I knew I had to make a choice, but the choice was impossible. Telling him the truth would destroy everything, our marriage, our lives. But if I didn't, if I kept pretending that nothing was wrong, then I would be destroying myself. It was a slow burn, and I could feel myself being consumed by it. One evening, after dinner, my husband suggested we go for a walk. It was a simple request, one that would have seemed normal not so long ago, but now it felt like a test, like a moment where everything could change. I agreed, my heart racing, not sure whether I was walking toward an inevitable confrontation or simply delaying the inevitable. We walked side by side, the evening air cool against my skin. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets empty, as if the world outside was holding its breath along with me. We didn't speak at first. The silence stretched between us, and I couldn't help but wonder if he knew. If somehow, in some way, he could sense the distance that had grown between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but filled with an uncertainty I hadn't heard before. "You've been distant lately," he said. "I know something's bothering you. I don't know what." I stopped walking, the words catching in my throat. I didn't know what to say. How could I tell him the truth? How could I break everything we had built with a single sentence? I wanted to say it, to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come. The guilt, the shame, the fear, all of it was paralyzing. He turned to face me, his expression searching. "You don't have to carry this on your own, you know," he said. "I'm here. You don't have to pretend everything's okay." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve any of it. But I had put him in this position. I had created this mess, and now it was all falling apart. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "I don't know how to fix this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can." He stepped closer, his hand gently touching my arm. "You don't have to fix it alone," he said. "We'll figure it out together." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that everything could be fixed, that the mistakes I had made could be forgiven. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The truth, once revealed, would change everything. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. We continued walking, but the weight of his words hung in the air between us. The longer we walked, the more I realized how far apart we had drifted. Not physically, but emotionally. There was a chasm between us now, and I wasn't sure how to cross it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence oppressive. I could hear my husband's soft breathing beside me, but it felt like we were worlds apart. The truth loomed in my mind, heavy and unyielding, and I knew that sooner or later it would have to come out. But when? And how? I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to lose everything. But I also wasn't ready to keep living a lie. The choice felt impossible, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no way to know what awaited me below. Would the truth set me free? Or would it shatter everything I had ever known? The night stretched on, and I lay awake, lost in my thoughts, unsure of which path I was going to take. And I knew that, whatever choice I made,